All right. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight for the third steering committee meeting for the Lawrence Bikes Plan update. Um, Primary topic tonight will be the strategy rankings. We got the responses on that survey. Does everyone have a hard copy that wants one? Okay, so I think just to kind of start a little bit with the process behind the survey and the rankings. So we gathered those strategies from previous bike plans, other best practices, things that we've heard from the community already, both through this process and in adjacent or previous processes. And so really just lots and lots of options. And put everything on the table, see what we can come up with. And so we did still use the 5 E's to separate into kind of categories of sorts. Those were originally from the Safe Routes to School program and have been used in a few of our other cycling and pedestrian efforts. Each ranking had those 5, or each strategy had those 5 responses available. Don't know did not get any points, and then the other rankings from not important would get 1 point, up to very important was worth 8 points in the ranking system. So it grew exponentially 1 through 40. That is how we got the numbers that you see on that first page with the strategy priorities bar graph there. We did keep the colors as well, just to help kind of track where those E's were. We went with this instead of ranking each of the categories on their own, because that would have gotten us the top of each one. And as you can see, we ended up with 2 education, 2 engineering, and 1 and 1 enforcement in our top 5.
That exercise really was just to start to stratify those strategies to kind of give us an idea about which ones you feel like are going to be the highest value kind of in that space. I think we're going to continue to look at those from that framework to think about level of effort it takes for some of those things and components, recognizing it would be great if we could do this entire list. In fact, this entire list may end up in a bike plan toolbox, recognizing though that the level of intensity of effort for all of them is not going to be the same. And so because we don't have the in-house capacity, maybe the community capacity, all of these issues, right? And so starting to think about kind of from that perspective, some of the things that are back burner processes versus some of the things that need more active attention in terms of robust programming and building things based on those priorities. So we can start by going through any of those and talking about anything, if anybody was surprised by anything, or answer some questions or any questions that people had about any of the strategies or comments you specifically made or saw that someone else made. In terms of those things, I'm happy to entertain kind of just a discussion in this space as we move forward to evolve these strategies and or further define them and or modify kind of based on what we heard back from you based on our first draft.
Did anything surprise you guys?
No, not necessarily, although we do hear often from the public about engineering. And so it was probably the most interesting thing to me is that those things are very stratified. And then there are a lot of things in these other spaces where that's the challenging part, I think, for us is the other spaces are some of the things we have less control over in the planning realm because they require cultural change, they require other community partners, they require somebody, maybe an organizer or activities to do work in that space. That's not space that we either as planners or when we work with engineers are within our role, right? And so we have to think, I think, we have to think about how this plan, when typically the city writes a plan, it's for city activities. But if you look in other communities that are doing these things successfully in lieu of having city staff, are on the edge of maybe coordinating or depending on how they do maybe transportation demand management, trying to push people to bicycles as a traffic solution, for congestion in those spaces. That's often how some of these things first get funded in this space. That those are the things that I think we have to think about how we write a plan that really serves the community in the sense to get partners buy into some of the activities. And so it's got us thinking about, all of you at the table are some of these people in these spaces, but how do we get buy-in from all of these different groups in these spaces as we're drafting this plan to end up with a document that's not going to sit on a shelf and end up with something that's going to be specific, that's going to be general enough to give guidance to all of these parties to hope get some groundswell to implement, I think, but also give guidance in that space that everyone's comfortable saying, yes, this is the plan we're going to work on for the next 5 years.
What strikes me here is, okay, we have these strategic priorities. They could be modified by ease of implementation. So if you really would find a way to, categorize them, priority, ease, degree of implementation, multiply the two. And,
Yeah.
or something like
Yeah.
that.
And I think we probably can do some ease of implementation. It may be a cost value thing, we're trying to think about that. It may be based on cost. Implementing the network is going to be a very high cost thing, but it also is going to be high priority. Yeah, that's a given. I think in the scale of compared to some of these other things. Whereas wayfinding falls maybe in a different spot in that same thing and has a price tag that's a little more medium, but some of these other things, the things around education or encouragement, some of those things are hard to quantify because the cost of those is less. We're not going to build it and we know an engineering cost, we can go look at programs and what other people are doing and see what costs are. But they're a little, depending on the level of intent, there's a lot of cost range, I think, in some of them, based on the level of intensity versus if it's a government program versus if it's a nonprofit program where they won't have, you know what I mean? They may have less costs, but I think we're going to try to do that to some magnitude, I think, to kind of show that there are both some high cost and low cost things in the prioritized strategies.
And maybe cost is not limited to finances.
Level of effort.
Yeah, level of effort, level of opposition. You're trying to get something that would say, here's where we gotta put our effort. It's a high priority. It's relatively low in terms of resistance. Yeah, you're cool.
Sure.
I don't know how.
Yeah, I think we were thinking of some sort of chart that had our top, for a final plan that had the top prioritization of strategies kind of that need to be there in the thing, and then some sort of priority level, high, medium, low, or short-term, long, medium-term, long-term, and then also some level of you're talking about level of effort or investment or commitment or whatever. So I appreciate that comment because I think it is kind of the way we were trying to lean, and it's just going to be about us figuring out how to tell that story, what the right way to do that is.
I thought I don't know what the strategies are very nebulous, and until we correlate with them with specific actions or specific projects. Construct low stress bikeways along priority and secondary networks. Yeah, that's great, but how do we put that into action? And how we put those things into action, because any bike construction at all could come under that strategy, whether it's an improvement or or kind of a fluffy,
Yeah.
make people that don't ride bikes feel good about things.
And so for right now, I think we tried to frame it in terms of thinking back from that first document we gave you, which is like, here's all the ways that bikeways are created. And we wanted to make sure that we had strategies based on all of those methods. So whether it's governed by land development code and we need something to happen in that space, like by development, if it's governed by complete streets policy because it's part of regular street maintenance and it's part of regular work, or that prioritization based on what we're gonna hopefully determine at a couple of future meetings after we do our next round of open house where we talk with the community about gaps, and we come back and share that information with you and both review the existing network, that feedback that we get, the existing network, and then the reaffirm the priorities, or right now we call it priority and secondary network. We can call it a number of things. Maybe that exact language, I think you're right, might change based on how we determine what the priority is or how we need to do that. But that hopefully we can refine some of those things. In some of them, though, we may not want to get very specific, right? Like in an education thing, we may want to say, try to develop this program and figure out how we're going to do it and leave it up to, that more experts or best practice in that space. Do you know what I mean? Not be specific in the design of something, but it's more like, here's the outcome goal related to this activity. And how do we get there? Because that may change. I don't know. But I think if there are spaces where it's not clear, those are things that are helpful to tell us, because we will try to explain them better in context in the plan, or we will try to further define them if we think it's unclear in a way that leaves it too vague for future activity.
I like the first one, for instance, I see that as an overriding principle or a goal, it's the.
Engineering one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Engineering one.
Yeah.
It's to increase that network to, with level of comfort, that there are a lot of other, like you mentioned, there are other specific actions that can get us to that or towards that, it'll never be done, but towards that. So I see in a lot of these, there's some that are very specific kinds of things, and then others that are principles of the plan, basically the reason for the plan to exist. So kind of looking at it that way helps me, because I see engineering one as, well, that's what we want, but like you say, there are a number of ways of, with different approaches and funding sources and that kind of thing that would lead us to that. So being able to strive at these would be helpful.
And right now we're basing that language, for example, for EN1, based on how we currently have priority and secondary set up, with the hope that we're going to be able to share that with the community, knowing we're coming back to you to say, what does this look like in the end, this network? But two, also around this level of comfort goals, we have already had the conversation with this group that we, and the public has told us increased level of comfort. And so there's some national guidance, and I think based on those things, we're going to go back and look at and have a conversation with you at a future meeting around that table that talks about speed and volume with appropriate design comfort. So we say based on level of comfort goals, we haven't defined those yet. We're hoping to define those. So it's kind of a little bit chicken and egg. We're trying to say, okay, we think this is going to be the priority. Now if that's the priority, and this is how we're going to write it, let's define what that is in the plan, because we're using that as a tool then to implement when we look at a future project in a bikeway gap. We're using that table then to link to our design standards and criteria. So I think it is a little nebulous in that sense that we're asking to read this and trust that this is moving in that space, moving in that direction to try to get us to this goal. And then we're going to have to keep refining these things to add to what will be like a future plan text document to get an outcome we want. So, but that's the type of conversation I think we're hoping to have. So if there's other things, I saw someone write in there about complete streets policy, where we're like, follow the complete streets policy. And then we have a couple things where it talks about revising the complete streets policy based on Vision Zero guidance. But I think somebody wrote in the comments, like, I think it was in relationship to this, that it said, is this working? I mean, And that would be a question, like, do you think, we're saying follow the complete streets policy, the complete streets policy is being used on multimodal projects. Is it working? And so, that's a question I think we can have that conversation, projects that were a result of that, that policy and where we're at in that space. Like, if we need to bring back to you, what is the last 5 years of street projects, you know what I mean, since that policy's been adopted and the resulting bike or ped improvements, I mean, we can bring that back to you to show if that's something you want to see as evidence to explore about whether or not we believe that is moving us in a direction that we want to be in. Of course, if you're saying, is the complete streets policy working, but you're not satisfied with the exact element that got built, then it means something got built, right? But the thing that got built, you don't like the level of comfort it is, then I think that informs us, we have to go back to the level of comfort table and look at that in terms of changing the design. If we're getting something in those projects, if we're not getting what we want, if it's not because of level of comfort, if it's because of funding, then that's a separate conversation. And those are probably the two biggest reasons, I would say, if we think about complete streets policy and if it's working or not, where we would need to be in a space.
Right, because of specificity of complete streets policy and level of comfort that doesn't necessarily, those aren't.
Yeah, because a complete streets policy doesn't mean every facility in every location. It's context sensitive. So, and it's context sensitive to all of the considerations, and there's an out for budget, right? Because sometimes you can't afford the thing that, the decision is made that you're not going to spend the money on the thing that may be the most desired or safest or because it requires space or other trade-offs in the process. So is that something that would be helpful to you as we talk about level of comfort, to see a review of projects in that use the complete streets policy, for us to put something together that was some sort of information to show what is a result of that?
I think so, it would be, okay.
Ninth Street is a complete street, right? From
Ninth Street's a good example.
Joe's Donuts to past Emery Road, but when it ends, it's horrible for bicycles.
Yeah.
Because it just, the bike lane ends going up a big hill and there's no space for a bike and a car anymore. And there's no, where are you supposed to go? I mean,
Yeah,
what are
and
you
I think
supposed to do
I
then?
think those gaps are some of the hardest thing about how we're currently implementing the bikeway network, is because it's piecemeal, really tied to the roadway project in those places that it's tied to the constraints of that project. It's not, and then maybe that's a conversation when we're talking about priorities, that we have some high value gaps. You know what I mean? The challenge becomes in some of that space funding. If we're talking about $500,000 a year, that's funding standalone bike ped projects, then and we already know, like, some of the just preliminary estimates I've heard around just completing some concepts of a loop is 20 million. Then that really is contingent on grant funding, larger fiscal investments, and or just coming to terms with the fact you're either doing less than what's expected in that space because of other financial trade-offs. And some of those are outside of our control of this planning process. So we're trying to lay a framework out that we think is approachable based on kind of all of these considerations.
As a complete streets policy, it's tied to specific projects, and so.
So the project already gets identified. So yeah, so the complete streets policy comes into play when a project has already been identified as a roadway project, often because of pavement condition. So a project is slated for reconstruction or significant maintenance, and therefore then an engineer who's doing that project process fills out the complete streets checklist to evaluate all the needs of the street. So when they're rebuilding with the intention of all users. So the constraints of the project are tied to the constraints of the project for the most part.
Yeah, because if there's a gap beyond that project, that doesn't get considered.
No, it's not part of the complete streets policy. It would have to be part of a standalone project then. And so
Mm.
this comes back to all the ways that bikeways are built, and it's not, there's various different ways, and most of them are tied to funding mechanisms. But the funding mechanism is the trigger for how the project gets identified. So in standalone projects, it's the priority and secondary network. There's the standalone funding for that. And then the projects list out the gaps along that network. Everything else is subject to either private development or complete streets policy. So 23rd Street is a good example of a complete streets policy project. Also, where the reconstruction of 23rd Street, where there was lane narrowing, the whole road curb and gutter was rebuilt and the roadway was narrowed, shared use path on both sides of the street, from Haskell out east. That's probably one of the bigger capital projects that has applied under complete streets, but so I think having that conversation is helpful to let us know that we need to do provide to you a complete streets project review to show you, since that complete streets policy was adopted with the checklist. Because there was a complete streets policy and then there was a complete streets policy revised with the checklist. And since that checklist, we can go back and look at all those projects that have used that and kind of the resulting bikeway.
So there's another aspect of the complete streets policy that doesn't have to do directly with new bike facility development. But it says that when you have an existing bike infrastructure, if there's any kind of construction, like where they're gonna block part of the roadway or something like that, they're required to mark a detour and tell cyclists and pedestrians how to get around that blockage. And because I ride my bike a lot, I see instances all the time where that does not happen. And when, I've talked to people at the city, like where is the detour? One time I was told that the detour was printed on the city page, which doesn't help like a tourist. I mean, they don't know to look there. And there's currently, they blocked off the bike lane that goes from Clinton Parkway, the north end of the dam, down to the Arboretum. And so the signs saying that road closed are right at the beginning of that, and then at the end of that, both ends of that. But that doesn't help the cyclists coming from, it would be helpful to have that signage farther out so they can make a decision about how to get around it. And then there is no detour mark there.
So do you think, we'll go back and look at the policy and see if we think the policy is adequate.
Right.
Because I don't know if it's a policy issue, like, does the policy say we're by detouring these modes? And or if it's an implementation issue.
I think part of it, so there was one, for a couple of weeks, there was one section there by the Parks and Rec driveway coming through past the Arboretum, where they were doing some, I don't know what they were doing, but they put in some new sidewalk there. And so the people putting up the signs, again, put the signs right at the point, so after you've already crossed the highway and you've gone through the Arboretum, then all of a sudden you see you cannot continue, you have to turn around and go back. So I asked, there was a Parks and Rec guy there, and I said, so this needs to be, we need notification earlier so we can know when to turn around. He said, well, that's not our job, that's their job. And I said, whose? And he said, the construction guy's job.
Well, they have to put together
Traffic
traffic control plan, but it's reviewed by
But the
city staff.
construction guy, yeah.
Yeah, but it's reviewed by city staff. So, and that's what I'm saying is it the policy that needs review? I don't know. Or is it an instance of how it's getting reviewed and implemented that needs?
And as someone from Lawrence, I know how to get around that.
Sure.
So if I was visiting and I had read in the brochure that you have this loop and it's a great place to ride, I would be frustrated because I wouldn't know where to go.
Or even cyclists who don't travel the city as much as you do, you haven't been over on that, that side of town or something, and then.
Right. And some cities I've been have had detours and they do it well, and then there are others where you're just like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
It's getting dark.
Waiting to go explore that.
Yeah, we can look at the expectations of those traffic plans as well.
Mhm.
So I know that for automobiles, there is a expectation that the detour takes you to a similar classification of intersection. And that might not be the norm or the standard in the text, because yes, if you're closing down all of Haskell, you give people warning where you need to turn off.
Right.
And that might not be implemented quite the same as pedestrians, so I'll look at the traffic
Okay.
control standards for that as well.
Because MUTCD requires import zone. You know, and those requirements, those federal requirements for providing an
Yeah.
alternative.
You have to have the.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be for, and you got a whole chapter on like pet, it's supposed to be for that.
But I think there can be a recommendation about that. We just need to dive in to figure out what that recommendation needs to be in that space.
And
Yeah.
there could be a bicycle status website that says the loop is gonna be closed in this location because they're having a run at blah, blah location, or there's a section that's out because, but, you know, you would, by the time you get right to where it's closed, your detour was back a mile or two.
This is really relevant because there's a GIS tool that can do some of this, and the city's been piloting it in Esri. So if you ever use Google Maps, you may have seen a lot more roads showing up as closed recently. It's working. And so they're inputting, instead of just the traffic calming or traffic, weekly traffic update emails they're sending, because again, that only goes to residents who may have signed up and it's in text,
Those
it's
are-
not usable.
Those are announced one time, and
That's what I'm
in
saying.
ensuing weeks, they never give any status updates. And for cars, they announce that there might be a left turn up here and that road is closed, and it announces a block earlier, the road's closed ahead. And it turns out the road's not closed, but a connecting street is closed, and so it's pretty unclear.
So try Google and see when you get like to map yourself, even if just going places you already know, and see what it tells you, because I've noticed they're piloting this in a way, but we can see if it works for bikes too and how that works, because I don't know how it's set up for like on-road. I mean, the on-road stuff would apply if you're mapping that way, but I don't know how Google isn't very great about how they interpret our bike infrastructure and how they route people using the bike routing feature. But I know that for particularly the automobile function, we're working on improved stuff around GIS. That would be anybody then who, because those services get picked up by all the mapping things. So then anybody who comes into town, if you're just using a routing tool, it should help route you. But I think in the same place, just like that, posting it on a website is not going to necessarily help unless you have it in a way that people can actually access it. So it's like, you have to go back to the navigation tools that people are using. You know, if there's like some automated.
As a follow-up for that, just a similar topic with the weekly traffic updates came up recently. You mentioned closures for bike races, events like that. Would the recommendation include events in the right of way, or would it be focused on closures like the work around the Arboretum?
Both, I think. I've been out on the loop on a Saturday morning, and the race has that section of the loop closed down.
Yeah.
And you don't know it until you get there, and would be nice if there was a way to get a heads up on that. But you have to look and see and such, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, so both
That can be
events,
coordination.
temporary and, longer term
Okay.
shutdowns would be appropriate.
I think so, it's interesting, the engineering versus, education number differences. I think some of those speak a lot just to the outliers. Like, so when you look at, in engineering, the outliers, the wayfinding system, which is ironic because, I agree, I've had that experience where you are, shut out somewhere from a detour, and for me, it was like, it could be difficult, very difficult when you don't know where you are, whatever, but, but the wayfinding systems, I think, work best for a well-established bicycle network. So it's kind of, in some respects, kind of like the loop. It's well-established, or, parts that are built. So it, there's more use there, but, it just, the wayfinding line was, interesting that it was so low. And then for the educational components, you also had two outliers as well, right? The driver education and safe routes to schools, which I think both those really speak to like just this particular moment in terms of a large kind of disconnect between like what is happening on the roads in terms of perceptions of safety. And also a growing recognition of, you know, the need for, mobility independence for children. I think that's a growing recognition, so, yeah.
The wayfinding was the only strategy to have at least one of every vote. It got everything from not important to very important to don't know. And it was also listed in a comment as well as being important as a top priority. So it was certainly interesting to kind of see the variety.
Pull one lever here that you thought would make a sea change and turn us into a cycling community? Is there a thing in here? that
Well,
would
what do you
that?
think? I mean, tell us what you
Well-
think it is.
I don't know. When we lived in DC, they put, and I don't think this is the right one for Lawrence, but bike share being installed created an entire community change around cycling. There was suddenly huge demand for cyclists. And then for infrastructure, for maps, for all of these other things, and they followed, and other community groups filled in the places that the city wasn't doing. And so I'm just trying to think from like a systems thinking perspective, where is the lever that has the greatest ability to change the way we cycle? But I don't know either.
Does anybody else?
Have you
have a
seen
thought?
case studies from other communities our size? I feel like DC is not a good comparison for us.
No.
Just to mention the bike share, because then we try that here.
Yeah, I don't think
Years
that's
ago.
right.
Right, I know it's probably not, but I mean, it's interesting that one community creates
Yeah,
a whole community around it, and here it turned out to just kind of be a disaster. So
but they had docks. They had bikes, they had vans driving the bikes from the places that needed bikes to the places that had bikes. So in the morning, all the bikes would come into the city, and then you would need somebody to move the bikes out. And so it was a much better organized bike share than the one here where bikes were just kind of. strewn all over
Well, the
place,
bike share
not great
system here
bikes.
was really set up to fail because it didn't allow anybody to geofence areas outside of the university unless you had in excess of code required bike parking. So you had to go through a site planning process in order to verify that you had more bike parking than the code required to be able to get a geofence. So technically, there were no geofences anywhere outside of the university.
Yeah.
And so it was set up. Like it was never gonna succeed because there was no destinations you could legally, according to the rules, get to
Yeah,
and lock the bike and check it out. So,
if I had a gut sense, it would maybe not be things that are kind of. Feel like your vegetables here, like the good for you stuff, it'd be stuff that make people's lives easier, like every single day on the Facebook moms group I'm on, there's somebody complaining about parking lines at their school and the hour they spent to drop their kids off. It would be something that makes people's lives easier or more joyful or more better in some way. It's not something that feels good for them. Does that make sense? But I don't know what items that might be exactly.
Wanted to ask relatedly, is there space for us to supplement the Safe Routes to School plan, for instance, by like planning for school streets where we designate for each?
not as part of this plan, no.
No, okay.
But the Safe Routes to School plan is gonna start this fall, so follow along for more information. Because I think this planning effort is not designed to engage all the schools and the parents and PTAs, and that one is. And so it's set up to be really engaged towards the specific user group and the specific audience. It has high coordination with the school district and school specific sites. So I think the recommendation in here that ties them together is implement the Safe Routes plan. The action needs to happen, whatever you recommend as part of that. But we saw that comment and we sent it to the planner who's gonna be leading our Safe Routes process, so. I think the interesting thing on a lot of those things where I see that, like I read the, skimmed through the article just to get a context and they always talk about a lot of those and then those enforcement in the spaces where things are working as automated enforcement. And so you saw that recommendation in our plan also because the state as part of their Visions, what's their statewide program?
Drive to Zero.
Drive to Zero. I think it's a Vision Zero program. It's called Drive to Zero. One of their recommendations for a pilot in that work around safer streets is piloting automated enforcement. And one of the case studies that I think they looked at and they referenced on the call I was on was in relationship to school zones. So,
Yeah. Currently, we can't do automated enforcement. But most states that were discussed in that call have focused that on certain areas. So whether that be school zones, specific commercial districts, that way it's not an across the board.
that's how they politically got
Yeah,
the
that's-
pilot started and leverage it in their state houses. So I think that would be the approach they probably take. That's how they've written the strategy around that. And I
So we'll
said,
take
yes,
legislative
or-
action
or
to
interest.
make that.
because right now there's no provision that allows you to do that automated enforcement. But as we talk about safety, I think that's where we see a lot of effectiveness of safety. Crash reduction, especially severe stuff, is places where they're using automated enforcement. Anybody else have any ideas to answer Jenny's question about if you had to choose one thing you thought would be the?
There might not be a magic bullet.
No, there may not be, but one or two, like, no. I think I think, and you all have lived some of this too, so you should answer this if you think differently. I think our standalone funding has changed the conversation about what's happening here in the sense of that, since that has happened, we at least now have funding that we're funding projects that are specific to bike plan, bike network. The reality is the amount of time that's happened is short. It's less than a decade. And we built all of this over the centuries. So like, we're gonna have to think about time, either hiring level of investment or time in a longer frame, sticking to continued implementation, I think, to see that. So I think that'll be something interesting to watch is, we have probably the highest profile standalone project with the Mass Street project in terms of a project where we've done where we're doing something that's in used level of comfort, has a higher level of protection with the curb buffer. And that will, and has leveraged an immense amount of grant funding to fund the whole scale and scope of that project. Where the bike priorities are driving that project, as opposed to, street maintenance.
That's when 23rd and Mass just isn't a destination on my bicycle.
No, but it connects the 21st Street Bike Boulevard to Massachusetts Street. So it's part of the network because it connects these other components that have also been invested in.
And Haskell University.
So whether or not we stopped at 21st or 23rd, like, yes, there's still more connections we're gonna have to fix, but taking the full extent of the project to 23rd also improves safety for all users because of the improvements to that right free flow, right turn lane off of 23rd Street onto Massachusetts Street.
Okay.
So there's other so like project started as a bike ped project, it's prioritized as a bike project. It's gonna have pedestrian improvements because it's gonna connect sidewalk gap along both sides of the street. It's reconstructing sidewalk to 6 foot to the new an ADA standard, improve bus stops, and then it also has other safety improvements of mid-block crossings and the removal of that free flow right turn lane. So it became a project that was standalone bike ped. When we did the visioning, it became more of a community and vision project of, through that complete streets process. Because again, it's a project that's been identified. It has a lot of other benefits for users in that space.
Yeah, because like going from 21st to 23rd, you gain that traffic calming aspect for the whole corridor where, by reducing it to 3 lanes, it it slows traffic down for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But it also does connect to the 21st.
But you still have to get across 23rd Ave or 23rd Street, and that is still gonna be problematic
At a
because
signalized
cars are gonna be
intersection.
pushing hard to go first. And I mean, I go 21st, I think to Barker, and then there is a 4 sidewalk, so you can get to, I mean, in Barker, you can cross safely with the light, but you can also get over to the trail because there's a crummy sidewalk there, and that might be a project that the city is looking at, a CIP or whatever. But
Well, and I think that's this
work
is the whole
around
thing is
going.
where do you stop? Right?
Yeah.
Because in all of these conversations, it's to tie into the next thing is, it's not just necessarily like, oh, it's $100,000 more. It's like, oh, that's another $500,000, million, $2 million project. Do you know what I mean?
To ride
Internally.
on a less busy street that doesn't have as much traffic on it is not a $5 million, $1 million. I don't,
Well, I mean, I think the community's telling us that I think in some of those cases, the community's telling us they don't want to be relegated to just not being able ever to cross busy streets. They don't want to be relegated to just the neighborhood streets, that they want through direct routes that are calmed, where traffic for all users is. That the use of the street for all people is safer.
I like taking side streets and not being on the busiest streets in town myself. Who likes, I mean,
All right.
Yeah, but that's a side street now compared to what's currently a 4-lane semi-arterial, right?
Mass
So
Street.
it is safer to take Barker in its current state with those updates to Mass from, what is it, 14th all the way down to 23rd now. As Jessica mentioned, that entire intersection is getting done at Mass and 23rd. So the pedestrian connectivity there to get you to, what is that, the west side of Haskell into that neighborhood, it's gonna be way better than just taking Barker and being on, like you said, poor condition sidewalk or out in street traffic. I'd rather be in a protected bike lane and then cross 23rd there.
Okay.
And I'm sure the majority of the community would too, and that's why that project was identified.
But I think this arises a good point, which we've dealt with over time as we work in this space, is that all people who bicycle don't view the routes they choose with the same level of comfort. And they don't maybe have the same level of personal comfort and safety in those spaces. And this is why I think when Jenny was talking about at a previous meeting, where we really need to define and work to build for how do we get the future bicyclists? How do we get the people who aren't bicycling now, but could for their trips? And how do we design an all ages and all abilities network that has a level of comfort that speaks to a viable mode choice with the bicycle? And that isn't, I don't think, by building a set of routes where you have to squiggle through the back way and double the length of time you travel. It's about creating a culture where our streets in a shared way are safe for all users. Because those improvements, particularly even the improvements on, if you think about some of the other streets that we've done, when we've done the bike or ped improvements, they increase safety for all users. We're maybe narrowing lanes, let the width of lanes, which reduces crossing distances, or when we reduce the lane width, we're slowing speeds because it now doesn't feel as safe to travel at such a high speed. And so it's about collectively, I think, more about designing streets in those ways that they work for all users, as opposed to saying, oh, you're on a bike, you need to take this lesser route, whatever, or this existing back ways route, because it's the only thing that's ever going to be a viable option.
I might even take it a step farther and say that what could cause a sea change is when biking is your best option, or walking, or because parking is easier, or it's faster, or it's safer, or it's more fun. But for some reason you think this is the best way for me to get from point A to point B. Going to the game, parking is gonna be a nightmare. Okay, let me ride my bike. You're going downtown, there's an easy way to park that's safe. I don't have to circle the block 8 times to find a spot. Making it so that that is the option that people feel like, okay, I guess I'll do this, but like, oh yeah, this is the best way for me to get there.
Yeah, Phil, you mentioned getting across 23rd Street, and that's one of the things that I think is less expensive, although I don't know a lot about traffic lights. But so if the crosswalk has said that a pedestrian or a cyclist can go across, it seems like it would be a lot safer if there was no right turn on red for that, and also no left turn.
Isn't that one of the recommendations that we said, look at traffic signal?
I think that was another one that is a very large umbrella of a strategy. But that would fall under the signal timing changes based on VRU high injury network from Vision Zero.
Right.
So that could be prohibiting right
Yeah.
turn on.
Right. So in a very busy intersection, you know, it's not that comfortable to, I mean, you know, you
We
get
should clarify
crosswalk
that.
and then all of a sudden cars are turning as well because they have a yellow flashing light and they don't see you. And so if they didn't have that yellow flashing light and had to stop and let the pedestrian or the cyclist go across, that would make.
They're looking the other direction, saves us.
Yeah. Yeah, there's one I cross through every day.
That just happened on Iowa on the way up here. The person was crossing the bike lane there and somebody was wanting to turn right and you know, the sun's right there and everybody was okay. But it was close.
Do those strategies include also the possibility of using leading pedestrian intervals at some of these higher risk intersections as well? Okay.
Yes, and actually, we have some Vision Zero stuff around leading pedestrian intervals at safe routes to school arterial crossings, and so we have a grant we're waiting to hear back from about that specific strategy. that I think. So a leading pedestrian interval is when a pedestrian pushes the pedestrian push button, that they're given a grace period before the light turns green for people to begin to go. They are given an advance, please walk, so they can begin to get out further into the intersection so they're more visible to cars who may be doing turning movements. And so it's already being used in a few intersections in our community based on some specific conversations. The one I can specifically speak to is Clinton Parkway in Inverness. It became a school crossing with boundary changes where that intersection is using leading pedestrian interval already. It's a signal timing issue with just a little bit of delay for cars. So pedestrians or people using the push button can get.
What about the one at Iowa and Southwest?
There are a couple others that may have it. I can't.
That one I know doesn't.
Okay.
People are coming off the highway there and they're looking that way to see if there are any trucks coming and you have the crossing light and then they turn. I mean, that's a really. I don't know how
All of
many
those
people-
require engineering study and signal timing considerations from an engineer
It's kind
who
of
does
moot
signal
because
timing.
once
I
they
know.
get that all expanded
Yeah.
there, that's gonna be different.
So I just say that because that position is currently also vacant at the city art traffic engineering.
And I always just watch the cars that stick my hand out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Recently.
Have your horn.
Yeah.
I think all of those are a process where.
Yeah.
There's been previous requests to the traffic engineer, they've been investigated on a case by case basis. This strategy, this one about identifying prioritized signal improvements. We can clarify a little more what that means, but if that strategy is there, I think it means something that's a little more holistic about. What's your policy for how you're gonna evaluate these things based on bikeway network, safe routes to school, other components of that. I added some notes about how to modify that language.
Y'all remind me, the survey results, what were the barriers, the biggest barriers to cycling?
We can pull it up.
Give me a minute. Talk about other things.
I don't have that memorized on the top of my head, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine, I think this is a great question, but what would you do, right, like which one? I mean, it's not exactly on here, so maybe it's not like, or maybe it is on here, I don't know. But it just seems that, there are a lot of roads that are really over capacity. Or rather, under capacity, sorry, under capacity, as in there's a lot of space. There's a lot of space in the roads. And, have to take it, like, to allow more, diversity of users, cyclists, and also just the calm traffic itself. I just think that like there just needs to be much more dedication of alternative modes. Because cars have this tendency to crush, literally and metaphorically, all of the modes of transportation. And it's. Sorry. Thing.
And we have two big projects on visible corridors that are doing lane reallocation, 9th Street and Mass Street. So I think those are gonna be good, kind of, I think we've heard the commission say too, they're looking to see how those perform and how those result in terms of, I think, satisfaction and resulting kind of use of those in those spaces. They've kind of indicated that, I think, in their comments about implementation of those and future considerations for stuff. Any other thoughts about? What's the thing it's gonna, that? Honestly, you want me to tell you what the thing that will push it over based on research? Fuel prices increase.
Oh, yeah.
Fuel prices increase and you're gonna see fundamental changes to transit ridership and other modes. And I say that just to get you thinking outside the box about what does it take to make some of these changes in communities? Sometimes they're unspoken things that happen that all of a sudden kind of just like make something else a necessity. And so I think if you look at research, I mean, that's a really fundamental one that you see changes in when fuel prices increase. Are we gonna advocate for that? No, but I think those are, I just say that in the sense like it matters.
That makes sense to me. I think. Doing things like road diets like we saw in the 21st Street project. The political will isn't there until there's like a bigger community of cyclists needing it or wanting it, or. That there's more community demand for that. To me, that feels like the thing we have to figure out in practice, like how do we create that community will? And then all this other stuff will follow, but I don't know the answer exactly. I guess we can raise gas prices.
Also, subsidize parking less.
Yeah.
And use that money. For bike projects.
I don't think it's as expensive enough to take up downtown space with a car as it should be. Maybe it's because I lived outside of Chicago for 10 years, but what you could spend on a day for parking here doesn't even come close to paying for a few hours in that city. So, and it's very different because they have a metro population of however many million, but if we're trying to reimagine the spaces for all users, car users get off pretty easy. So how you
And I think
identify-
fundamentally, there's, parking operations plan that's underway with different things. There's residential parking permits that are getting ready to be piloted as a program. So I think there's things in that space also that it's a long time. I mean, we've been talking about that since the beginning of my time here. And so like, it's an evolution of just the constant little things, I think, that impact some of that. Stephen pulled up the question you asked. Careless or speeding drivers, gaps in comfortable bikeways, road condition, aggressive or harassing drivers.
Safe parking.
Safe parking.
Big one. Downtown especially.
That secure bike parking thing, I think is a really big reason why the bike share programs that are in docks work so well. Because once you dock it, it's no longer your bike. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, that'll be an interesting thing to see in terms of like, there had been a conversation to do the city had put out an RFQ, maybe a request for qualifications or proposal before COVID to do scooter share and got responses. And then COVID happened and then we came back to stuff and it was like, this isn't a priority anymore. Once stuff started running again, and I think, you know, KU was a big partner, or the lead kind of in the students' drive and interest in bike share was a part of the reason why it happened the first time. And so I think in this community, particularly, that the universities are gonna have to be partners in that space for whatever happens related to any micromobility share, but I think we find in some of the university research that we're doing about best practices, that's a really key component of a lot of the culture in a lot of university spaces around bicycle usage is access to bike share. You didn't see that list of, we're building a separate toolbox for universities. That's kind of part of a more selected approach, like research approach to thinking about what that looks like in lieu of having, you know, the KU bike plan being a document that's kind of long needed for an update. And not having a committee, particularly at the University of Kansas on their campus where they used to have one. We're working on some of that also.
I think the wording from the strategy about long-term parking need to be worded a little bit stronger than just explore. You know, I think the goal should be to get it developed, you know, I mean, the first step will be exploring it, but in a 5-year plan, I'd rather, and not say explore, yeah.
Yeah, as much as I ride my bike, I don't go downtown and leave my bike parked. So there, if I'm going downtown, I take my car because it's not safe. With my bike. I don't really like that, but. I mean, unless I stop at Sunflower.
Right, that's the only
Hang it up.
place.
Place you-
One of the things that might be really powerful in getting people to ride their bikes downtown is encouraging businesses to provide
Mhm.
safe bike parking themselves.
Right,
And having that indoor, you know, I'll ride down there and hang my bike up and then go some other places.
Yeah,
also. Like, it's really the only option.
I think revising EC1 might help with that. It talks about encouraging local businesses to apply for bicycle friendly business designation. That can go a little bit further to maybe creating a portal for businesses to commit to bike parking downtown, especially along Vermont, Mass, and New Hampshire, where we do have the largest foot traffic in the city. Where businesses can commit to that and potentially receive funding in the future, if that's ever on the table, to assist in the development of a more safe space for bike parking. I know there's other communities that do that.
And we, you know, there has never been, I mean, there's a couple bike friendly businesses, they're all people's own personal initiatives, but there's never been an effort for any club or anybody to go out and educate businesses about what it would take and ask people to do that. And imagine how that may be very successful just to start that process, even if they don't actually apply, because there is a cost to applying and being a continued member. But there's a lot of low cost strategies probably that we may be very successful at getting implemented with an effort from places that you frequent as a business, if that was a concerted program that one of the, you know, clubs chose to do as for advocacy. We could add some more definitions about what that might mean for businesses.
I like that idea. I think one of the articles I saw recently in the paper, and Sammy probably know better than I do, but they were talking about how it's getting expensive for downtown employees to park down there. And so when I was talking about bike share, I've been thinking about it. I don't think it was the bike share itself. It was that suddenly it solved some other community problems, like the metro in DC kind of sucked. The escalators were always out. It was kind of expensive. You had to wait a long time. Buses weren't great. Parking was terrible. Driving was awful. Like it solved some other pain points in the community that weren't specific to biking. And so those places where I think we can solve those things too with biking, we might have the best opportunity for success.
Yeah, I think the destination thing has to matter, because as you talk about, is it easier for me to do this thing? Well, if it's not easy, and even people who do it all the time say, well, I don't do it because my bike will be gone, then it's not gonna be something that you're gonna be able to encourage people to do simply if they don't have all the resources and tools and know-how in that space.
I think another example of areas where different types of cyclists have different experiences, and those resources can build up. I love to bike downtown for events because I know I won't be able to find parking. But I also take my oldest beater bike that I can, and I lock it up. And, it's a trade-off. Not everyone has that, option.
Any other thoughts in this space around this? We're gonna reflect on all your comments and make adjustments to language to help refine stuff. And then we'll be presenting some of the high level priorities at the open house to share with the community about some of these strategies. And as we refine that, we'll bring stuff back to you in a later draft so you can see how that looks in relationship to probably the charter, the level of effort or commitment, and all we took notes of all the things kind of we had in the discussion. Any other comments we want to chat about in
Is there a
regards?
date set for that, community engagement?
Yes.
Yes, we haven't published it anywhere yet, but yes, we have set it internally because we had to reserve a room space.
It will be at the library on September 30th, the Tuesday evening. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but there'll be a survey going out as well. That'll start prior to the open house. We felt that was successful with the last survey, that people kind of came to the open house with thoughts and comments ready. So we'll have it open for a week before that. So aiming for the 22nd to open the survey. That'll be open through early October, probably through at least the Oct agenda at this point, since since there appears to be a tabling opportunity. So,
And we're working.
still getting that finalized.
Say that, what's the event at the library on the 30th?
That'll be the next open house, the public open house.
For the bike plan.
Okay.
So we're gonna share what we heard from the first round. We're gonna go back and, we'll have a lot of the same, some of the same material just for education, because it's informative for people to see how stuff is. We're gonna share with them these recommendations. We're gonna have the results of that last feedback. We're gonna be at that point collecting feedback in the online survey about gaps in the network. So show people the existing bikeways in the bikeway plan and ask for feedback about gaps and their thoughts about connections. And then we will have, just another general open comment about content, then be able to bring that back to you to have a conversation that I believe our next meeting probably is gonna be about. We're gonna be workshopping those comments about the specific connections and routes, looking at the network, what we have planned for the whole network, and then have the conversation about priorities, which is priority and secondary, which feeds into the standalone funding thing. So that's what's upcoming for all of us after we hear that feedback. I think we would probably also plan, based on the conversation tonight, to try to bring you back. It may be a little longer meeting because we're gonna have work to do, but based on those comments, we're gonna try to bring you back some high level things that we think need to be addressed based on that, to kind of set you up in that. So we'll give you that beforehand. And then to bring you back the complete streets conversation thing about what we're looking at for that. And a level of comfort review about that. So there will be kind of three components. We'll do a meeting. We'll see how far we get. We may have to meet again, and I don't know which of those topics will need more work, but will give us some time to reflect on it, revise, and come back with where we're at. And then I would envision, this is our future item, but I'll just kind of lay it out that then we would plan to have later after that a draft plan for consideration and conversation. So, and we've begun drafting the parts of that related to where we've been in the process so far, and some of the fundamental stuff that kind of just comes out of our previous plan that is just being reworked in the narrative. So you've seen a lot of content already, like in the status of the bicycling update and in the safety stuff. And so I'll mention that now, if we look back at the agenda, there are other things that we've given to you. And we can talk about it. We go to like formally move to item 2. Is everybody good with our conversation about strategies at this point? If you think of something later, please email us. I think we'll keep iterating through this. We try to get these to you early, so you have seen them by the time we're asking you to give final comments. We've iterated them and you've had time to sit with them. The second item on the agenda, we have provided you of what we call focus group recap. Stephen kind of led the idea of the 2 topics related to some further exploration through some focus groups and their summaries, both about bike parking and what would our plus users, electric bikes and electric scooters in that space. So there's themes in there, some more engagement stuff you can review. We also put together where the wheels go. So we get emails often about, can I use this device here? Can I ride an electric scooter on a shared use path? Can I ride this type of device? And so we've tried to define those and kind of show you what that looks like. Stephen's going to share this chart that we began to make to show you. Maybe you can make that bigger, right? That's tiny. But to kind of show you what the regulations say from the standard traffic ordinance, that's what governs most of these, is the standard traffic ordinance that the state develops each year and the city adopts. And so as part of the conversation about plus users is what's allowed in kind of each of these spaces. So we hear some comments occasionally about different types of users and behavior, and their behavior. Often it's related to what people perceive as bad behavior from some different users that have higher speeds.
I was just shocked that I'm not allowed to roller skate down my street.
What's your street?
But no public streets.
Yeah, no public
I
streets.
mean, I think there are opportunities there to change other. I don't think I looked at the standard traffic ordinance and it's the basis is not in state law. It's just I mean, it is, but not like, there's no state law saying that you shouldn't rollerblade in the street. It's just can regulate rollerblading in the street.
Sure. And there are some local ordinances that have further restricted these. It starts with STO and then we have as a city further restricted something. So take a little look at this now that we've called your attention to it in this space, because if there's additional recommendations you want to think about in that space, as we think about the plus user side of it, if there's some other mobility thing, this is probably the most viable space for us to think about how that might also fit into how we get people moving. This is probably just educational for lots of people. And there isn't really an easy to find guide. And I mean, I look at Pat when I say that because Pat's been wanting to email me in the last year to say, can I do this activity here? Or like, can people do this activity here? I think you were asking on behalf of somebody else asking, but oftentimes we get forwarded those things. Parks and Rec gets emails. It's like, who does that email go to? And technically, I guess it goes to law enforcement because they're the one that would be enforcing it. And it's majority under either local ordinances or standard traffic ordinances. But we just put this together as kind of like the first guide.
A lot of the e-bike questions at the river trail and I was like, what do you want me to do? You know, some people are like, oh, do something. I'm like, but I don't think that's illegal for them to be there, you know, so we reached out to Stephen and he was like, nope, they can ride it, so it's.
Well, so can they, yes or no, is one consideration, but even if they are acting in a way that is illegal according to this, it comes back to who is
Who's
gonna
enforce it?
who can enforce it in the reasonable, timely manner that it needs, that it would need to be
Right.
to change behavior, and I think that's a whole secondary question.
Doesn't that say yes for everything on an unpaved trail, which would be the bike
It
trail?
does,
So
yeah.
electric bikes and everything, but
Yeah, the electric bikes and the motorized bicycles has been a big question for a lot of people,
mhm.
because E-bikes have been kind of accepted, but the motorized bicycles with a little bit of a throttle, that's where a lot of people don't know that those are able to
Well-
be ridden.
And are any of those gas?
Or at least there has not been any
Yeah.
restriction, right? Is that what we're talking? That's-
Motorized bicycle in this list would be gas powered.
Okay.
Electric bicycle would be one of, class 1, 2, or 3.
All of it.
So that includes, throttle is class 2. So both of those would be allowed. Now, when you talk about unpaved trails, now we're gonna get into where I spend too much of my time. But electric bicycles, all 3 classes are limited at 750 watt capacity or output from the motor. There are other communities in adjacent states that are seeing very high powered electric motorcycles. They're dirt bikes, and that really gets into the enforcement question quite a bit as well. But yeah, in this chart, motorized bicycle represents a gas powered.
Is there a speed limit on shared use paths on the loop path?
Posted at
There's a
15
yeah.
on signs.
It's posted?
Yeah, this would be a good
Really?
place for
15?
monitoring.
It's posted.
Yeah, I don't know that we put, I
Cause
mean,
you're not gonna have police. on-
Yeah.
But you can have-
Yeah, and there are limits, there's a speed limit, the electric bicycle classifications technically all have limits. Although. Had someone volunteered as a focus group, but can be worked around
can modify them.
fairly easily, which presents its own concerns. Another thing that I would mention, just because it does relate to the strategies a bit as well. We sent this list to be reviewed by the police department, and one of their frequent calls right now that doesn't fall into any of this chart is mini bikes, which are small gas powered motorcycles that they're getting a lot of nuisance calls about right now. And I think that ties into a little bit of what they're seeing with this chart, some of the strategy recommendations, the one around driving in the bike lane. That's something that Kansas City has created an ordinance against. Currently, talking with PD, if you're driving a car and your wheels are in the bike lane, you are driving improperly in 2 lanes, and they can address that. But if you are a motorcycle or a smaller vehicle and you're traveling in the bike lane, that's acceptable currently.
I think the value of this is in some of these conversations, we start to figure out other things that it's like, oh, this is the problem, or this may be the issue that needs the attention.
Yeah, I think it
So-
helps us.
Yeah.
Make sure that we're focused on the right piece instead of spreading out lots of effort.
The number of devices just keep growing exponentially. In terms
Yes.
of modifying.
Yeah, and like Segway is not even on this list, but
Right.
that used to be, and, you know, part of the conversation. We'll kind of keep evolving this, maybe think about what that might mean for strategies as we talk about a next conversation about strategies, if we need something in this space, once you look at this and have a little time with it. The item 3, we've just reposted, we've reshared with you the bike survey results with the added components that we promised last time about showing a few more graphs and charts of comparing some different things. We've added some additional, anything you asked for us to give you last time this is that content, where we went back and made revisions to include whatever that context is. We will pull up and share the 21st Street bike traffic data. Which we had talked about changes in vehicle behavior based on that street, and the percentage change saw 78 to 85% reduction in volume and 18 to 19% reduction in average speed based on those improvements. So we we're looking for bike ped counts. We have to get access to a software and validate some counts that were done to see if we think that we can trust what's in there. And or that we're working on also as part of this planning effort, a more systematic approach to doing some bike ped counts with our counters. So that will be coming once we can kind of work to get some of that done as part of our program. But I wanted to share that with you and call that to your attention, kind of to show you what the traffic data had shown related to implementation of the Bike Boulevard. I think we did hear some comments in the survey that talked about people drive faster in that space now. But that's,
Do we have the same data for East Neesmith?
we do not. So this is the location where the data was collected when we requested it from engineers. Something we can request. It's added, I mean, it can get added to workflow and we can see where we can get on that, but I don't have that.
My sense is that the kind of more areas of interest are east of, or Naismith and to the east. We have school traffic, there are more chicanes in that section. There were also many, the links are longer, like these have shorter traffic diversions and there, I know for the eastern segment, there are, a lot of it was taken out after it was initially, or there are proposals for things like speed
Well,
tables.
it was, yeah, it was value engineered. It had to fit the budget. So that's what happened. I mean, that's what happened with that project. There was a concept, it had a lot of elements, it got value engineered to the budget, and those elements went away because of the cost of the project.
Yeah. So yeah, that's. Right.
We can request it and add it to the list and see if it's, I don't, and the engineer who worked on that project a long time ago is long gone, but we can go back and look through the files, because I would assume they had traffic counts from other pre-counts, because there's no, post counts tells us one thing, but the value is looking at pre and post, and so the, we can go back and look. This is what when we requested it, this is what we were given.
And maybe some other streets that have had the speed limits reduced, that haven't had, that are not a full-fledged bike boulevard, to do a comparison of. Is it the bike boulevard and the Tetons, or is it the lowered speed limit that is impacting traffic?
We have that from neighborhood traffic management. I think they did pre and post values and
West
stuff,
has it,
and there is a
Delaware
report
Street's
online.
now-
Let me go look. Let me go look for that. If, I'll try to find that. Let me find that for you. I think that also exists. Okay. So those things are just kind of for your information on there. And then we talked a little bit about our next phase, for engagement. We invite you all. We'll make sure you have the invitation once you see it go out, to invite you to come to the meeting and talk to people with us. We'll be tabling if you want to come staff a table with us and talk to the community with us as part of this effort. If that interests you, again, we have the same commitment for delivering to you back all the feedback we hear from that process for our future conversations. And that's kind of our plan moving forward at this point. Any other questions or conversation you want to have with us about?
Is there any tabling planned for the Lawrence Parking Day? I know it's a few days before the planned open house. But if
We haven't
that's,
built that whole schedule out yet, though, so
Okay.
Stevie can add that to his list about any of the events that we want to be at
okay, that's September 26th.
downtown, so yeah.
What is that, Lawrence Parking Day?
So Lawrence Parking Day, this is going to be year 3, I think, that we've done it. Basically, the KU Urban Planning Program partners with a bunch of different businesses downtown. And we take parking spaces and create little parklets out of them. So it's parking day. So the theme this year is like the third space. So where are you going outside of your house and work to go exist? So we're taking a bunch of different parking spaces downtown and reimagining what you can use those spaces for. So that might be a really good tabling event to show what we can use parking for downtown and how we can reuse that and combine it to the bike plan.
When is it?
That is September 26th. I believe the official times are from 4 to 6 or 7.
Really fun event.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Sounds like.
We did it before COVID, so it's longer than 3 years. I think the timeline is going for a while.
Yeah, when we tabled for a previous pedestrian plan, we did so in the RV on Mass Street. Like we've been involved in different things before for that. For those. But yeah, if you have other events in the period of time that Stephen talked about, we're happy to entertain them. We talked about Optagenta or other things.
Are you guys gonna be involved in the walk, bike, roll Kansas Active Transportation Summit that's happening at downtown?
We are, some of us are going, but I serve on the statewide, committee. For the planning of the conference, but also their active transportation committee at the state level. And, so we're involved. And in fact, like, you'll see our city engineer is gonna be one of the guest speakers. And our mayor is gonna be there talking about our fair city and biking, so we have some connections back then. It's a state hosted event. So
Yeah.
if any of you are thinking about it, I think it's a good event. They've done it for a few years. You know what I mean? To
Yeah,
get attention for their active transportation plan and the work that they're doing to try to get communities to think about all these different users and spaces.
it's $50 for a layperson to sign up. Or a nonprofit group or whatever.
I'm leading a bike bus that Wednesday, if anyone
Yes,
wants to ride with us.
thank you for mentioning that. I
Yeah.
totally forgot that was part of the agenda. People are gonna love that. They're gonna eat it up.
What time is it?
What day?
It's I don't know the date.
Oh,
Towards
yeah,
the Wednesday
it's
of the
already-
week.
Date again?
It's-
What?
What was the date that you were?
Oh,
29th and
29th.
Why don't you just send the invitation from the state out to the group? So we don't have anything else. We have one final thing, which is we're going to need photos for our bike plan. So oftentimes we can go be in a lot of places and we can get some photos. But that sometimes means that we also do some photo shoots. So if that's something you're interested in, we'll send out an email and you can let Adia know and we'll do some different things. Cause sometimes we don't get the cyclists doing the law abiding thing in our photo. When we're out just observing things, and that's what we need to try to show and display, and we want our bike plan photos to look like the people bicycling in our community.
Wearing helmets.
Yes. So many of you maybe have participated in that before. Catherine has, and Jared has. and Pat has. Yeah. I don't have anything else for you tonight, so if you have anything else for us, we'd be happy to entertain it. Otherwise, we'll see you at the open house and then in future October. Thank you.